Morning, everybody. Very good to have you all join us today. I'm William Reeve from GOODLORD, Chief Executive GOODLORD, and just hosting our second webinar today on the Tenant Fee Ban with ARLA's David Cox. Those of you who don't know GOODLORD, today we're not going to be providing too much detail, but we're an award-winning online platform for lettings agents. We help them get more done and sell more stuff. We've been very busy getting ready ourselves for the Tenant Fee Ban, which has been confirmed last week as coming up on the 1st of June. That is creating hundreds of questions across the industry. We've got over 270 questions sent to us in advance of today, and in a new innovation, we're going to continue to take questions throughout this webinar by Twitter, with instructions I'll give you in just a second. But to help us understand these questions, we're very, very fortunate today to have David Cox from ARLA. Many of you will know David. He's one of the most experienced property professionals in the UK. He's a qualified barrister. He became Chief Executive of ARLA Property Mark in 2014. He's been working closely with the government as it's been trying to finalise its plans for the Tenant Fee Ban. Just before we kick off, I've got a couple of quick housekeeping points. The webinar is being recorded and we will be sending out a full recording just after we close today. And we are taking questions in real time. So if you have additional questions, please fire them at us on Twitter @SoGoodLord using the hashtag AskArla. So I'm now going to welcome David Cox. David, are you there?
Good morning. Yes, I am. Welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Hello, David. Very nice to see you.
And you?
And David, do you want to just give us a few words to kick off before we turn to the first question?
Certainly, absolutely. It's probably a good idea. It's been a few months since we did the last webinar. Things have naturally changed during that period of time. So I suppose where we are today, and today's actually quite a big day for the Tenant Fees Ban. The bill has now finished its passage through the House of Lords. There have been some last minute amendments, some minor and technical, some more significant. So, for example, the three more significant changes that have happened with the bill as it's made its way through the House of Lords is firstly the deposit cap. So, if we remember all the way back to the last general election and the Queen's speech after that, they announced that the deposit cap would be 4 weeks. When the bill was finally laid before Parliament, we had managed to move that to 6 weeks, and the bill went into Parliament at 6 weeks. At the very last stage in the House of Lords, that was then moved to 5 weeks. So at the moment, we've got a 5-week deposit cap and tenancy deposit cap if the annual aggregate rent on the property is under £50,000, or 6 weeks if the annual aggregate rent is over £50,000 per year. Number one. The other significant change that we've had in the last few weeks is around default fees. And this one we've kind of been expecting because the original clause in the bill was very widely drafted. So what we've got now is only 2 default fees effectively. One for loss of keys and other security devices, which can be charged at a reasonable cost. What reasonable means at the moment, we're not quite sure. We're going to have to wait for the government guidance to come out after the bill becomes an act. And secondly is rent arrears. And rent arrears can now be charged at 3% above the Bank of England's base rate. It's chargeable from the day it falls due, the rent falls due or falls into arrears, to the day it is paid. But if they are less than 14 days in arrears when they actually pay it off, you can't levy that interest charge. I have seen recently some comments about you'll be able to charge for letters and rent arrears letters. You won't any longer. You did under the original bill, but under the latest amendments, you're not going to be able to. You will still be able to charge for change of sharer, capped at £50 or the reasonable costs if higher, and you'll be able to charge for surrender of tenancy. But apart from that, that's about it. I mentioned a moment ago that today's quite a big day, and that is because the consideration of amendments is before the House of Commons, not long after Prime Minister's questions later this afternoon. We were expecting it to be pretty much a nod through, but there has been one last minute amendment from the Shadow Housing Minister, that certainly hit the list of amendments listed on. And that amendment will holding deposit currently 5 so the government will try and force that one out. So I am getting quite a lot of feedback right now.
Yes,
I'm assuming the government will try and will object to that reduction from 5 weeks to 3 weeks, but there is an amendment from Labour's Shadow Housing Minister Melanie On trying to reduce the 5-week cap to 3-week cap to a 3-week cap. I don't expect it to go through, but it is going before Parliament later this afternoon. And William, should we start taking the questions?
Yes, so thank you very much for setting the scene there for us, David. So I've got an enormous range of questions here. I think I'm going to start with the ones around deposits, start the process in so many ways. So do you want to can you just clarify, this is a question from Rob Hall from Assured Lettings, how we avoid applicants withdrawing once the application process has already begun?
So that comes down to, it's actually Schedule 2 of the bill around holding deposits. So holding deposits, you can take up to 1 week's rent on the property as a holding deposit. You can hold it for 15 days. If you, as the agent or the landlord, pulls out, you have to give that holding deposit back. If the of the successful tenant, you also have to give it back. If the tenant pulls out, then they forfeit their holding deposit. That's been done very deliberately to stop tenants going, I'll have one from you, one from you, one from you, one from you, and then deciding which one I will have. So if the tenant pulls out, they forfeit their holding deposit. Similarly, if the tenant is dragging their feet and not responding to emails, not giving the referencing agency what they need, and it goes beyond that 15 days, they also forfeit it. But I would say on the other side, if it is the agent or the landlord that is dragging their feet and goes beyond the 15 days, you will have to give it back, even if there is another reason why you can withhold the holding deposit. And I'm sure we're going to get other questions about the 15-day rule.
Yeah. Okay, very helpful, thank you. What about existing deposits, David? If there's an existing deposit in place, an existing tenancy greater than 6 weeks, this is a question from Zoe Rose, actually, at Dolphin Square Estates. Do they need to hand back the excess?
Yes and no is the answer to that one. Typical legislation, it's not a simple answer. So what we're expecting the guidance to say, and whilst we've seen draft guidance at this point in time, we haven't seen the final guidance. And on the face of the bill, that answer isn't actually there. But what I'm expecting the guidance to say is, as long as the tenancy continues after the introduction of the ban, you won't be expected to retrospectively give back a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on whatever length of deposit you've taken. However, if the tenancy renews, anything in excess of 5 weeks will become a prohibited payment, and therefore you will have to refund. So for example, you've taken a 6-week deposit, you take it 1st of January this year, tenancy renews 1st of January next year, you'll have to give back that extra week. If the tenancy drops onto a contractual periodic, I think you'll be fine, providing you've got the magic words in your tenancy agreement. And the magic words are from X date to Y date, and then monthly thereafter. If you haven't got and then monthly thereafter, you will drop onto a statutory periodic. And there is the case of Broadley versus Leeds City Council from last year that says a statutory periodic is a new tenancy every month. So what I would suggest is, if you haven't got those words in your tenancy agreements now, you should put them in, because otherwise you're likely to have to refund anything in addition to the 5 weeks once the tenancy renews after the ban comes into force. Does that make sense? That's
great. That's gold dust, David. Thank you so much for that advice. But in terms of other tenancies that are, if you like, some work in progress, so deposits that are held on, so longer than 6 week deposits we've just talked about, but in terms, for example, of student lets, this is a question from Carly Clark at Bridgefords. Student lets that we're trying to secure now, but so before the fee ban comes in, but which will start in September. They've already paid fees. If we get the tenancy agreements drawn up and signed, can we keep the fees that have been paid so far?
Yes, is the answer to that question. So the law is not retrospective. And Holly, what you're talking about is what is known as the transitionary provisions. So all acts of parliament have what are known as transitionary provisions because they have to, the bill has to deal with tenancies in that case that are in existence. And for us, 1st of June, there will be millions of tenancies in existence on that day. So what happens to those? And the law is very clear at the moment. And what it says is that the ban only affects tenancies entered into, i.e. contract signed, on or after the day the ban comes into force. So in practical terms, any contract signed on or after the 1st of June this year, no fees. Doesn't matter when the tenancy starts, when the tenant moves in, it's all about entering the agreement, so signing the legally binding contract, which does make me think there's going to be a lot of tenancies signed on the 31st of May this year, but that's just on an aside. But let's just go back to Holly's actual point of student. Yeah. You're signing the contracts today, last couple of weeks, the next few weeks. All of those you can continue charging fees because it's when the contract is entered into. So as long as you're getting the contract signed now, any fees associated with that tenancy can still be charged. And here's where it gets slightly more technical. For a period of 12 months after the ban comes into force. So let's take the example of today, of a contract signed today, tenancy starts September, October. All fees associated with that tenancy can be charged up until 12 months after the ban has come into force, i.e. the 31st of May 2020. Yeah. So taking Holly's case of a student tenancy, all the setup fees, the application fees are perfectly acceptable. Tenancy, let's say the tenancy starts on the 1st of August, any during tenancy fees will be acceptable, but we have to think about the checkout in that situation. And the checkout will probably be the 31st of July, for example, if it was the 1st of August start date. That will be after the 31st of May next year, and therefore they won't be able to charge the checkout fee. And that is, it doesn't matter when the tenancy starts, it's about 12 months after the ban comes into force. So 1st of June in force 2019, last date of chargeable fees for existing tenancies, 31st of May 2020. I'm going to have to add now another extra caveat to that one. If the tenancy renews during that period, that becomes a new tenancy. Think about the case of super strike and tenancy deposit protection. And whilst the Deregulation Act amended the tenancy deposit protection elements of the super strike case, it didn't overturn the judgment that said a renewal tenancy is a new tenancy. So if you do renew the tenancy during that 12-month period, all fees will be banned because it will be classed as a new tenancy after the ban comes into force.
Okay, that's very helpful. And in fact, I think that deals with the question from Laura Giles at Woodbury Homes as well. So thank you very much for that, David. Lots of questions about other things which are either in or out. So, for example, question from John Ansell at Boothroyd and Company. He says, I have a landlord who doesn't take a deposit, and regardless of how much the rent is, he charges £200 non-refundable move-in fee. Will he still be able to do that?
No, completely banned. That will be
that's really the point of the bill, isn't it, David? That type of fee is out of order, whether it's from the landlord or from the agent.
Yeah, and but actually that is a very valid point. Whilst that fee specifically completely gone, the ban doesn't just apply to letting agents; it applies to landlords as well, and it applies to third parties. So referencing agencies. Good Lord, it will apply to you if you charge tenant fees. It applies to third parties as well. So whilst we talk about the lettings fee ban, it's more a private rented sector fees ban. So it's not just letting agents.
Yeah, super. Right to rent checks, David. Question from Twitter, actually, from Zoe. Does that include right to rent checks? How are we supposed to make sure that people are eligible to rent?
So I think there's 2 points on right to rent checks, and actually if I made 3 points on right to rent checks. Point number one, no, you won't be able to charge the tenant for right to rent checks. The landlord or the agency will have to pick up those costs. Point two, however, If the tenant fails a right to rent check, that is a reason for withholding the holding deposit. So if you've taken your week's holding deposit, the tenant then fails the right to rent check, that is an absolute right to withhold that holding deposit. And that is on the government's policy intent on that one is, if you're an illegal immigrant, you kind of know you're an illegal immigrant before you go to rent a property, and therefore you've effectively deliberately wasted an agent or landlord's time and money, and therefore the landlord or the agent can withhold the holding deposit. So that's point 2 on right to rent checks. Point 3, not sure whether I'm going to get it. I get it this question quite regularly. But what are we doing about EU citizens post-Brexit? The answer at the moment is we don't know. We have been pushing the minister for the last 4 months. We were exceedingly disappointed when they published the immigration white paper that it made no reference to right to rent checks, because let's be honest, there are lots of agencies and landlords out there that are signing contracts for later in the year, student contracts, as the earlier question's a prime example, where they don't know whether they need to do a full non-EU right to rent check on an EU citizen, or whether the current rules for EU citizens are going to apply. Let's add a further complication into that one. If you do the sort of full non-EU right to rent check, you could potentially be done for discrimination at this point in time, because you're discriminating against EU citizens. We are pushing on a daily basis. We sit actually on the minister's it was implementation panel for right to rent. It's now advisory panel for right to rent. We have been asking and asking and asking. We haven't got the answer. As soon as we have it, we will make sure everybody knows. But the best advice I can give at the moment is keep doing it as you are doing for EU citizens, and take the view that they do have the automatic right to live in the UK. So a copy of their passport is fine. If that changes, we will let you know as soon as possible.
Great. There are still quite a lot of particulars that people are trying to work out whether they're covered for. So, for example, commissions. The question from Mark Denton at Inspire Estates: can we receive commissions when selling insurance products to a tenant prior to a tenancy starting? So, again, really interesting question. The answer to that question is actually yes, but comes with a caveat. So, insurance products, what I'm assuming we're talking sort of contents insurance, tenant liability insurance, those sort of insurances. Now, if those are a condition of granting the tenancy, then they will be a prohibited payment and you won't be able to charge the tenant. If it is optional and the agent says, I would really suggest you have contents insurance, or I would really suggest you have tenant liability insurance, here is our preferred suppliers, go and talk to them, they will give you a good deal. That's absolutely fine, and as long as you are complying with the consumer protection regulations and notifying them that you are getting a commission or referral fee, that's absolutely fine, because it's then the tenant's choice to take that out. It's not a condition of taking out the tenancy. If it is a condition of taking out the tenancy, requiring them to get contents or liability insurance will be a prohibited payment. Okay, thank you. Another question from Twitter, actually, David, from Emma. Do we know whether we'll be able to charge a fee where a tenant wants to end a tenancy earlier than the end of the fixed term? And if you could just distinguish between before the 1st of May 2020 and after, that would be very helpful. That is a really important point, because that was something that was not clear on the face of the bill, actually, when it was first introduced to Parliament this time last year. We worked extensively with our MPs and the government to get clarity on this one, because under the original default fees clause, that looked perfectly acceptable. But what we didn't want, and something that ARLA was very clear about, is we tried to close as many loopholes as possible so that agents had absolute certainty, because what we didn't want is a kind of PPI moment for the industry later down the line, where it looked like it was acceptable to charge for surrender of tenancy, but then a court in 5 or 10 years' time goes, actually, no, that's a prohibited payment. And then every agent that had charged that fee would have had to pay it back. It would have cost the industry billions. So
very early in the legislative process, we asked for absolute regulatory certainty on both the change of sharer and the surrender of tenancy issue, arguing that it should be allowed because the tenant has signed a legally binding contract and wants to get out of it. And you want to change a name or a date on your flight, for example, a holiday, that costs a fortune. You want to get out of a mobile phone contract, you have to pay exit fees. Yeah. So there was a lot of evidence to say in every other industry you do have to pay some form of early repayment fee, let's call it. And the government did accept that one. So on the face of the bill at the moment, it says that surrender of tenancy fees can be charged. What we don't have at the moment is exactly what fees can be charged.
Right.
The bill just says it's acceptable. The guidance is what will say what is acceptable. Now, if you look at the guidance that's currently on the House of Commons library website, it's over 50 pages long if you really fancy that read. But what it says at the moment is that you can charge anything up to the total outstanding rent on the property. Now, that might be fine if there's 1 or maybe 2 months left, but if you're trying to get out of a 2-year tenancy in month 3, that doesn't really seem overly reasonable. So I'm expecting the government to provide more clarity on that one when the official guidance is actually launched. So the answer at the moment is yes. How much you can charge, I'm not quite sure yet.
Okay, very clear, thank you. So you explained the insurance situation. There's an analogous situation, I suppose, with referencing. Question from David Yates, Edward Grounds. Are we allowed to receive referral commissions from a reference company if we refer the tenant to secure a reference? Not compulsory, but they end up going for that reference company. Is there a commission permissible?
So this is an interesting issue, and one that I'm a little bit worried about. So technically the answer is yes, you can, but you are skirting very, very close to the edge of the law. If a tenant comes to you and you've not had any interaction with this tenant before, but when they arrive on your doorstep, for example, and they've already got a reference that they have paid for themselves without any involvement from you, that will be absolutely fine. If you signpost them to a referencing agency and recommend that they get a reference, again, technically not breaching the ban. However, if you treat a tenant any differently for refusing to do that, you will be liable. And I don't think it would take, a second-rate lawyer more than a few seconds to rip your argument apart. And bear in mind the penalties are £5,000 per breach, at which point they will probably go back and look how many tenancies you've taken out since the ban came into force and prosecute you for all of them. So I would strongly urge you not to do that. I understand the logic for doing it, but tenants effectively shouldn't be paying for referencing. Any suggestion by the agent going forward could well end up in massive penalties for you as the agent. So whilst yes, that is a possibility, I would strongly urge against doing it. Okay,
very interesting question from Twitter about that. So Sammy Butch asks, can we, as long as we're offering a free option as well, can we offer the tenant a choice for an enhanced referencing service and charge for that?
It's the same answer. Technically you can, but what is the benefit to the tenant? Why would a tenant say yes? And if you treat any tenant that says no any differently to a tenant that says yes, you will be prosecuted and you will be liable to massive, massive fines. Therefore, I am aware some of the referencing agencies are suggesting that. I would caution against it. And it is for that very reason that they are banning fees. So by undertaking those sort of business practices, you are basically continue doing exactly what they are trying to stop. So technically, under the letter of the law, you are just skirting the very edges and you are on a knife edge. When you talk about the spirit of the legislation, you're breaking it.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Sorry, that's not the response that I'm sure everybody was hoping that I would give, but
that's not why you're here, David.
Yeah.
We're looking for the right answers, not any answers. May we? So I've got an interesting one here from Brian Compton Reback. He's asking, can we? I'm paraphrasing him slightly here, but is the clue in the name, the tenant fee bill? Does that mean if you're not a tenant, if you're a guarantor, can we charge the guarantor reference fees and admin charges?
No. So it's called the tenant fees bill, true, but they actually have pretty much entirely removed the word tenant from the bill. What they talk about is a relevant person. And a relevant person is anybody that is involved in the granting, continuation, renewal, or termination of a contract. It includes prospective tenants, actual tenants, guarantors, prospective guarantors, mum, dad, the dog. It's exceedingly widely drafted. So no, it's you can't charge guarantors either.
Consumers, essentially.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the ramifications of this? Patrick Connolly asks, some agents are saying we can just charge the landlords more to make up for the lost revenue here. With that, arguably, he goes on to say, with landlords being squeezed by the government, you can sort of see where that argument is coming from. Is that a wise idea?
So I think every agency is going to have to look at this themselves. There's no one answer. There are a number of different variables. What is the elasticity in rents in your area? It's different in every part of the country. Is there the possibility of putting up rents across your portfolio so that actually what you're getting in your current management fee at the moment, the percentage of your management fee ends up in actual cash terms at the end as the same as you were getting before plus the tenant fees? That is probably the easiest way of increasing the rent, because the landlord then doesn't get an increase in their percentage rate for their management fee, but you're actually getting more as a result. That I would suggest, if that is possible in your business and in your area, that's probably the best way of dealing with it, because then the landlord doesn't, whilst they may be paying more, the percentage rate hasn't changed. That's not going to be possible everywhere. So yes, I am expecting management fees and charges to landlords to go up. You might also, what I would suggest is think about what you do for your landlords. And if you think over the years, and particularly over the last 10 years, the amount of different laws that have come in that have added admin time, costs to your businesses that you have absorbed as the agent, and you've not passed those additional costs on to landlords. Is it time to start actually explaining to your landlords the amount of work that you do for them? Yeah. The right to rent check is actually a prime example of that one. That came in, quite a lot of extra work for agents, but very few have actually passed that on as any form of cost to the landlord. So maybe you actually want to start thinking about the services that you provide to your landlord. Keep your management service the same, but if you want us to do this is a cost. We charge a right to rent fee to you to do the right to rent check. We charge, I'm trying to think, particularly end of tenancy. If you want us to deal with the possession proceedings, that's an additional cost. You want us to prepare the dispute in a deposit dispute case, that is an additional cost. So don't necessarily just think about putting up your overall management fee. Also consider charging for extras that are extra work over and above that you've done for free for years because that's what you thought was right. And very laudable and very, very honourable for you to do that. But we're moving into a very different world now, and therefore is it time? And it's one of the other things as well that landlords kind of take agents for granted because, oh, it's not that difficult, you just do it and charge me an exorbitant fee. I think it's time to actually tell your landlords the amount of work you actually do for them.
Great. That's very, very interesting advice. So thank you, David. So yes, there is some logic to this is the time to start putting up fees, but maybe not the core service fee, maybe more around the supplementaries.
Absolutely.
I've got some questions here. I had some in advance and got some from Twitter now about the sort of checkout process. Professionally cleaning, for example, how do you suggest we ask landlords to have their properties professionally cleaned if we can't put a clause in the agreement making it a condition that the tenant has it professionally cleaned at the end? This is a question from David Harris.
Yes, the professional cleaning clause. I do love this particular clause. I'm afraid to say that a requirement in tenancy agreement to have a property professionally cleaned at the end of the tenancy has actually been illegal since 1977. And I'm going to see whether I can actually manage this. It was made illegal under the Unfair Contract Terms Act of 1977. It was then clarified under the Unfair Terms and Consumer Contract Regulations of 1999, further clarified under the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations of 2008, and then further clarified for a fourth time in the Specific Guidance to Letting Agents. It was published in June 2014, and then absolutely clarified under the Consumer Rights Act of 2015, Part 2. Therefore, what I would suggest, professional cleaning clauses are already illegal. What you need to put is the property must be returned in the condition it was given, which was professionally cleaned. Now, it is entirely possible for a tenant to clean that property to a professional standard without employing a professional cleaning agent. So you won't be able to put those clauses in any longer. You will have to, must be returned in the condition which was professionally cleaned, if it was. If they don't return it in that state, then you can deduct it from the deposit. What you can't do is levy a fee for it. It will have to be deducted from the deposit. And that's, nothing is changing with deposit protection apart from the cap. The way deposit protection works is staying exactly the same. It's merely an absolute cap on the amount you can take. So they'll just have to deduct that from the deposit rather than charge a fee for professional cleaning.
Yeah, super. What about well, in fact, I was going to say other charges for changeovers, but there's a very interesting question here from Sean on Twitter about inventories and checkout, but it's not so much the fees as more the other rights coming in. So her question is, will tenants have an automatic right to see or have shared with them the inventory and checkout reports? And will that information in these reports need to be detailed and robust enough to stand up in the court of law?
They already do, all of those. So yes, they do have the right to see the inventory and checkout report, particularly if there was claims for deductions from the deposit. But they already have that right. And does it need to be robust enough to stand up in court? I would say yes, because that is the sort of level of evidence that the deposit schemes expect an agent to provide to them to justify the deposit deduction. So yes, in response to all of those questions. Okay,
very helpful, thank you. I have a couple of questions here about enforcement, David. So Nigel Pope at Miles and Bar has asked, how is the government monitoring and enforcing the compliance being placed on reputable agents?
Yeah, that is an exceedingly vital part of this piece of legislation. If we think in 2015, the Consumer Rights Act, they introduced the fee transparency rules. Nobody has really thought that they have worked because they haven't been enforced. A review in 2000 and end of 16, beginning of 17, everybody agreed they hadn't been enforced. One organisation did a piece of research that suggested that 93% of councils had done absolutely nothing. So only 7% of councils had done anything about fee transparency rules. If that happens again with tenant fees, then all professional agents are going to effectively, they're going to be at a business disadvantage to the ones that are continuing to charge fees. And let's be totally honest. We know that there will be agents down every high street come the 1st of June that will continue charging fees. They've created what is known as the Lead Enforcement Authority. And that Lead Enforcement Authority is going to have the power to, 1, issue guidance to all other trading standards departments in the country. so that we hopefully will start getting a little bit more consistency in interpretation of the law and application of the law than we have with other pieces of legislation. They will also be able to enforce themselves. Now, when you consider the level of the penalties, that is a massive incentive on local authorities to enforce, because if we look at, again, its draft guidance for the enforcement authorities, what that is saying is if an enforcement officer comes into a branch and finds that fees are being charged, it's not one £5,000 fine, it's one per fee. So let's take the example of you just let a 4-bed HMO or a 4-bed student property. That won't be one £5,000 fine, that will be 4 £5,000 fines. If that fee consists of an element of referencing, contract negotiation and inventory, that again won't be one fee, that will be 3 fees. So if you charge that fee to 4 tenants, instead of one £5,000 fine, you're now at 12 £5,000 fines. And when they then go and search back all the other tenancies that you've entered into since the ban came in, think about how quickly that will ratchet up to bankruptcy level fines. And that's just the first time. If they come back a month later and still and the agency is then still charging fees, that £5,000 goes up to £30,000 per offence. So these are, the concept is kind of bankruptcy level fees, fines, because otherwise it's not going to be fair on the professional agent. And ARLA has had no objection to that. ARLA has actually encouraged for the government to make it clear in the guidance that those agents that are continuing to charge fees afterwards should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. A simple mistake is a simple mistake, it's a different matter. But we all know that there will be agents out there that will willfully ignore this law and think, well, if I get caught, it's pretty low likelihood of that happening. And even if I do, I'll get a slap on the wrist.
Yep.
We are encouraging government, for those that are doing it willfully and just completely ignoring the law, at the detriment to every other professional agent in the country, they should have fines to such an extent that it bankrupts their companies.
Okay. Fighting talk. Thank you, David. I've got some questions coming through about pets. And I think this is really in regards to your previous point around you can't insist on professional cleaning, but you can insist on the property being restored to the previous state, namely professionally cleaned. And I've got any questions around, but can we, what if the pets cause damage? How do we charge for cleaning, which I think is covered by your previous answer. I've got another one around deposits here. Can an increased deposit be taken if the tenant has a pet? This is a question from Andrew Lefebvre at George Terrence & Sons.
I'm afraid not any longer. So the pet deposit, I'm afraid, is a thing of the past. It is an absolute cap at 5 weeks. You won't be able to charge more than 5 weeks if the rent is under 50,000, or 6 weeks if the rent is over 50,000. Therefore, you're going to have to look at different ways for pets. There is nothing in the law to say you can't charge increased rent for pets, for example. So you could put a sort of pet premium on the rent of £10, £20 a week. However, if you do, you have to consider the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading regulations from 2008, the CPRs, and therefore what I think you will need to do if you are going to start charging pet premiums on the rents is you're going to have to put them in your property particulars. You're going to have to put them on your adverts on Rightmove, Zoopla, and on the market and anywhere else that you advertise, because otherwise you're likely to be breaching the consumer protection regulations. And why is under the CPRs, you have to provide at the earliest opportunity all material information that will allow the prospective purchaser, in this case the prospective tenant, to make an informed transactional decision. If they don't know until they turn up at your offices or at the property for viewing that they've got to pay an extra £10 or £20 a week, I would probably suggest that is a material omission that would make you liable. So you might want to put and just make it now start a part of a sort of the standard blurb that you put on the portal at the bottom, or even probably at the top, additional £20 or £10 per week per pet.
But the liability there, to be clear, is that the same £5,000 per breach liability, or is that just the consumer protection liability under different set of legislation?
Yeah, it is a £5,000 breach. Yes, but it's under the consumer protection regulations, not under the Tenant Fee Ban.
Right. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're seeing quite a lot of Twitter traffic about pets. I think pets is obviously a
pets is going to be a bit of an issue because it has been exceedingly traditional to charge an extra couple of weeks. That is a change in business practice across the industry. It's not just going to affect letting agents, it's going to affect landlords as well. So that is something you really do want to think about. How are you going to deal with pets going forward? Yeah,
quite right. Thank you. Got a question from Sonia about nil deposits or deposit alternatives. So the question is, with more referencing agents promoting nil deposits as an option to entice more applications, how will these work? And are tenants more likely to leave the property damaged, and will we as agents be liable? So it's a slightly different question, slightly different direction, that question from Greenslade Taylor Hunt.
So, right, I'm going to take this in two parts. Yeah. Let's talk about deposit replacement schemes and the ban to start with. So, I think actually the question was very well phrased, option. And that is what it comes down to. So again, in the draft bill, a deposit replacement insurance scheme is an insurance premium for facilitating the granting of the tenancy, which would have made it unlawful under clause 1.3, I think it is, of the ban. We argued that that would kill off the deposit replacement insurance scheme market and actually significantly damage innovation in the industry. And therefore we asked for the government to exclude deposit replacement insurance schemes and other innovations that may develop in the industry over the years to come, because what the government was actually doing then was stifling innovation in a market. The government agreed with that one. So what they have said is, as long as it is optional, that will be fine. So what you won't be able to say is, you've got to use this deposit replacement insurance scheme. If you do that, that premium will become a prohibited payment. But if you say either you take a 6-week deposit, 5-week deposit, or you can use a deposit replacement insurance scheme, then that will be absolutely fine, because the tenant then has a choice between a free option, being the 6-week deposit that they will get back if they're good, or paying a non-refundable insurance premium to the deposit replacement insurance scheme. As long as it is an option, that will be fine. If you just say you have to go to the deposit replacement insurance scheme, all of them will become prohibited payments. And I'm terribly sorry, I've just forgotten the second part of the question.
So she's just asked, how will they work in practice, and are tenants more likely to leave the property damaged? So I suppose agents have got less skin in the game, I suppose, is the observation, isn't it?
That is ARLA's concern with the deposit replacement market. We haven't endorsed any one scheme. We are at the moment not allowing the schemes to exhibit at ARLA regional meetings, at regional conferences, exhibit in the Property Professional magazine, because we think they're still quite young into the market. We don't know how the end of tenancy process is going to work. Technically, tenants are still going to be liable for any rent arrears, but when you've got a 6-week at the moment, a 5-week lump sum of cash at the end, that's your money that's being held by the agent in the deposit schemes, you've got skin in the game. When you've already paid your non-refundable fee, have you got as much skin in the game? I don't know. I don't want to bash the deposit insurance schemes because they are trying to innovate in the market. But I can't say they're going to be absolutely fine, because there isn't enough evidence yet. They're a tiny, tiny percentage of the market. I think we've got to see more how they're working at end of tenancies. And I don't think, there have been quite a few now, but not the millions that we see in deposits.
Sure, still quite a small
set. I think we need more information before I really make a judgment on that.
Yeah, great. We've got a bit of interest here in in the sort of legislative process, David, I've got a couple of questions here. So first of all, apparently there's something else going on in Parliament at the moment, Brexit or something. Is there any chance that actually through Brexit, whether that's I suppose through general elections ensuing or whatever, that actually this doesn't actually happen or gets postponed?
So, right, okay, there's a number of points here. So, if we have a general election and the bill has not received the royal assent before Parliament is dissolved by the Queen and the general election is called, then the bill dies there and then and has to be reintroduced to Parliament. The whole process starts again. However, the very last parliamentary stage is later this afternoon, at which point, once it gets out of Parliament later today, all it requires is the Queen to sign the bill into law. And therefore, even if we do get a snap general election, I would be very surprised if the Prime Minister does not, when she goes to ask the Queen to dissolve Parliament, does not take the bill with her and ask her to sign it before the Queen officially dissolves Parliament, at which point it will still become an act. Therefore, even if we get a snap general election in the next week or so, I think the bill will still happen. Interestingly, I think Brexit is actually having the opposite effect on the tenant fees bill that we were all hoping for. And I'm not going to deny, I was hoping that parliamentary time would get so absorbed by Brexit that they would forget about the fees bill, or at least put it on the back burner. Unfortunately, that has not happened. If we think on the day of the meaningful vote last week, they've managed to still squeeze the tenant fees.
Which meaningful vote? Sorry, it's Brexit. Sorry.
Yes, the Brexit meaningful vote. Yeah, Mrs. May's probably least finest hour. But yeah, that day they were debating Parliament, but they still managed to squeeze the final reading in the House of Lords for the tenant fees bill. So I actually think that what the government may be doing is having a bit of a challenging time with Brexit, shall we say. And we may get to a pretty disorderly situation come the end of March. But the government will say, we are still functioning. Look, we've got the tenant fees bill. We've got that through Parliament, massive consumer protection measure. So I think actually the Brexit is causing greater focus on the tenant fees bill rather than a lesser focus, because it's what the government is going to use to demonstrate that it is still functioning despite the chaos of Brexit, and it is still protecting consumers. The fact that the bill will have absolutely no increase in protection for consumers, will probably do exactly the opposite of what it's intended, is irrelevant. It sounds good and it plays well in the media. So actually, I think Brexit is speeding up a process on the tenant fees bill rather than slowing it down.
Yeah, okay. So we're just going to our last 10 minutes. Although I have hundreds of other questions I haven't been able to get to, I'm still happy to take any final questions from Twitter. But just sticking to Whitehall for the moment, you've obviously been talking a lot to some of the policymakers, David. Post the 1st of June, post all this, let's imagine somehow or other that Brexit isn't dominating all their attention then. What happens next, do you think, as far as our industry is concerned?
Oh, that's a list. So, the private rented sector is a key issue for the government. And I'm not massively surprised, because no government over the last 20 years has really known what to do with this growing sector of the housing market. And that is evidenced in the number of laws that are being thrown at the industry with very little thought, no consideration for how Law 1 impacts Law 2, or more particularly how Law 146 impacts Law 1. They're not really doing it in a joined up fashion. There is no coherent government strategy for the private rented sector. It's literally throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. It's why we get so many new laws in our industry. It's why when we get to every April and October commencement date for statutory instruments, you get a load of new laws. So it's not going to stop. The tenant fees ban is not going to be the end. If you think at the moment we are awaiting the outcome of a government consultation on a single housing redress scheme and reforming redress and the ombudsman scheme in the industry, we are awaiting the outcome of a consultation on longer term tenancies and mandating 3-year tenancies. We are awaiting, well, in fact, actually the consultation closes in about 7.5 hours time on a single housing court. We don't know where the government is going on that one. The consultation is still ongoing. We have got the Regulation of Property Agents Working Group. So what training and continued professional development qualifications agents are going to need, what sort of regulator there's going to be, what will be the new industry statutory code of practice. All of that is being discussed at the moment and will be coming down the line in the not too distant future. If we think on the 20th of March, we've got the Homes Fit for Human Habitation Bill coming into force. We've got another, somebody told me at the end of last week, there's 16 private members' bills in Parliament at the moment relating to private housing. I'm sure not a massive issue for letting agents, but Airbnb is becoming a big thing. And at the moment, it doesn't sit in housing law, it doesn't sit in hospitality law. It's the completely unregulated Wild West that nobody knows what to do with. So we've got that coming down the line. We've got a review of selective licensing and licensing schemes popping up here, there, and everywhere around the country, with ever more bizarre conditions being attached to them. And so the government is reviewing selective licensing. What are we going to do about property standards? Does the Housing Health and Safety Rating System under the Housing Act 2004 need reforming? And Dr. Julie Rugg from the Centre of Housing Policy at the University of York put out a very detailed report last year arguing that instead of having selective licensing and additional licensing and HMO licensing and ever more complicated, ever more expensive, let's scrap all of that. Let's scrap HHSRS. Let's go to a housing MOT like you have a car MOT on an annual basis. And actually that's something she's going to be coming to discuss at ARLA conference in a few weeks' time. Sorry for the plug. But she will be there to discuss what she's talking about on that one. And that's the ones I can just think about off the top of my head.
No, that's very interesting.
I'm sure there's more. Oh, mortgage interest relief as well. God, let's not forget about mortgage interest relief, taxation reform as well. So there is a huge amount going on, and with the best will in the world, it's not going to stop anytime soon. Yeah.
So very, very clear. Thank you. And I think it's going to be my final question here before we wrap up. But I don't need to end on a cheery note, do I? It's not Hollywood. What does this mean for jobs? And does ARLA have any predictions? This is actually a question for Ian Crampton from down the States. Does ARLA have any predictions about the percentage of letting agents that could leave the industry after the ban, or the number of jobs, or what's the worst case scenario we need to prepare for here?
So I think we've got a few issues in that one. Last year, we commissioned Capital Economics, a leading market research agency, to look at the economic implications of the ban. That report came back that the industry, the lettings industry on its own, take the sales industry out, lettings industry on its own turns over around £4 billion a year. And that's just letting agencies, ignore suppliers to the industry. Just letting agencies turn over around £4 billion a year. Approximately £700 million of that, or 20% approximately, are tenant fees, and therefore that 20% will disappear out of the sector. In their most plausible scenario, what they are expecting is that agencies across England and Wales will lose about £200 million a year in turnover. Landlords will see an increase in costs from agencies of about £300 million a year. Tenants will see their rents go up by, on average, £103 per tenant per year. I say average, higher in certain parts of the country, lower in others. And approximately 4,000 jobs will be lost. So that is what Capital Economics is predicting. I would also say that the economic impact assessment, of the government's economic impact assessment for the bill, was actually based on Capital Economics' research.
Okay.
So the government has accepted that what Capital Economics produced for us last year and used it as the basis for their statutory impact assessments. In terms of what is going to happen to the industry, yes, I do think there will be jobs lost in businesses. I am already seeing consolidation in the market. You know, we read in the trade press on a regular basis about not just the large corporates acquiring smaller companies, but actually regional businesses acquiring books from others or acquiring other businesses. The property market actually runs a course, and has run it for many years, but runs a course preparing your business for sale. Now, normally we run it twice a year, gets maybe a dozen people on it at each course. Last year, it was our second.
Stand-up room only now, is it?
Sorry?
Stand-up room only now, is it?
It was our second most popular course. We had to put on over a dozen more courses last year to actually meet demand, and it became after the GDPR course that we ran, it became our second most popular course. So business agents are clearly very concerned going forward. I would suggest, though, there are two positives, and we focus very much on the negatives. But if I may end on a positive, I think there are two positives that come out of the Tenant Fees Bill and the Tenant Fees Ban. Number one, we have seen a race to the bottom, particularly on landlord fees, for a very long time, and less scrupulous, less professional agents slashing their landlord management fees and then massively hiking the fees to tenants. They're not going to be able to do that any longer, at which point it is those businesses, and I would suggest those less scrupulous, less professional businesses that are going to struggle the most as a result of the Tenant Fees Ban. And therefore, the people that are on this webinar, that have been to events and other webinars as the bill has been going through, have been preparing their businesses, you're the ones that are in the best position to capitalise on what is to come. Make sure you are also shopping to your local authorities, agents that are still charging fees, because they're damaging your business and you want them out.
Thank you, David. So, David, I'm going to just move to wrap up now, if I may. It's been a terrific session. I'm really grateful for it. I think the key takeaways for me were that this is for real. This is happening. 1st of June is when it kicks off. Transition period ends of 31st of May 2020. But any contracts signed after the 1st of June, the new laws apply. The penalties here are £5,000 for the first offence per breach. So if you discover on the 50th tenant that you charged for professional cleaning was in breach, so you've got a fine of 50 lots of £5,000. So this is something to take very seriously. And if I heard you correctly, the kind of the sort of economists, the capital economics folks at least, are predicting there's potentially up to 4,000 jobs at risk here. So it's a big deal, this, and I think you've been very, very helpful at helping us understand some of the intricacies.
Not at all. Happy to help.
We've all got a lot of work to do for the 1st of June. At Goodlord, we're doing a lot of work to try and make sure that we can help tenants best we can as they look to ways to cut costs and find ways to plug their revenue gaps. If anybody would like to hear more about that, Sophia is standing by. There's a link on the webinar for you to book a call in her diary. And in the meantime, we've got another webinar coming up on the 1st of May, another ARLA webinar, and we will very much look forward to having as many as possible of you join us for that. And David, thank you very much again for a fantastic hour.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.